today we are in Cafe Oto. I and Professor John O. Podmore.
Yes, that's me, the professor.
And we decided to create this podcast where we will analyze and talk about pioneering electronic music works. And thank you so much, Jono, for
Absolutely, my pleasure. Yeah.
joining me in this. And it was your suggestion to actually do this in Cafe Oto, which works as a great setting, doesn't it?
Yeah. Was there a lot of connections because we said we would talk about Stockhausen's telemusic, and of course, you know, the central theme, the whole kind of background to telemusic is about his Stockhausen's time in Japan and about Japanese culture. And Oto, of course, is a Japanese word, and the Japanese people
sound.
work here. Yes, that's it. There we go. Yes.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a nice connection.
Yeah, there are a lot of nice connections about the sort of music supported here also.
But interestingly, I mean, you introduced me as like professor. I mean, I'm professor of the practice of popular music at the Hochschule für Musik und Tanz in Cologne in Germany, where Karl-Heinz himself was a professor for 6 or 7 years in the 70s.
Yeah.
So we didn't actually overlap. But it's always interesting that, you know, because I'm dealing with the technology at the university all the time, and the equipment and the electronic music studio and our music studio, is that Karl-Heinz was responsible for bringing in lots and lots of gear.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've got a really beautiful 16-track tape machine in my studio at the Musikhochschule, which is one that he brought in, which has got a vari-speed control on it that you can control via control voltage, which is really unheard of, you know.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that he was doing. So there's this legacy of the guy all over the place.
Yeah, it was a big, important invention at the time. So you have access to, I'd like to say, museum value item in terms of electronic music in a sense, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's the first, not in our studio, but in the electronic music studio at the Musikhochschule, they have the first modular Moog system that was exported outside the US. So it was the first one that was bought, and it has to be Karl-Heinz must have signed what they call the Beschaffungsantrag, where you kind of the accounts to get something brought in, you know.
So that's where you are teaching.
That's where I'm teaching, yeah.
Yeah, where Stockhausen spent many years studying and teaching.
Yeah. And and Cologne, you know, has always been regarded as a centre of electronic music, because that's where they had the electronic music studios.
Exactly, WDR studio, elektronische Musik, and also post-World War II music, where krautrock and experimental rock was born, right? So I'm sure.
But the link that's really strong there is that Stockhausen. I actually noticed it down. Stockhausen ran for between 63 and 68. He ran the Cologne courses in new music. He ran a new music summer school.
Yeah.
For 5 years.
That was after Darmstadt, right?
Yeah, it was either after or simultaneous, but it was just at the summertime.
Yeah.
And I know personally, I mean, Conny Plank went to all of those things. Holger Schukai went to all of those things. I think Jackie Liebzeit dropped into a few of them. Definitely Hermann Schmidt went to a few.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people that are kind of kraut rock figures, especially Holger, was in love with.
It's like a hall of electronic music in a way at the time, right?
But I mean, but they kind of picked up all this stuff from Karl-Heinz, but they were applying it to pop music, to rock music, you know.
Yeah.
Idea of passage of time in music, and importance of improvisation and ring modulator on everything.
Yeah.
It's all stuff that came from Stockhausen.
Yeah. So we are going to, as we said in the beginning today, we are going to talk about telemusic which he composed in Japan. For Japanese people, he describes the piece as a music of all countries and races.
Yes.
And that's, I think, really inspiring in its own right.
It's inspiring, but this, for me, even though I love telemusic, I love the piece, but for me that edges into what I find problematic about a lot of Stockhausen stuff, and problematic with lots of German culture from that period, in that there is this obvious disgust for the generation that went before, for the Nazis, for everything that the Third Reich did.
Yeah.
But they're the children of the Third Reich, so they have the same, even though they were good guys, they had the same mindset. So it has that same megalomaniac idea that it's somehow up to them to decide what world culture is.
Yeah, exactly. Using the term world music in a way, it's almost like us versus everywhere else.
We decide how it's done.
But I think this phrase is not fully about it when we read the full story. What I see is some inspiration about the culture of Japan, but also Far Eastern countries that he traveled to, China, including China, and the sounds he heard there. But also I read about his journeys to New York, where he was very much inspired, and this is like the contemporary society where you see all sorts of people, that kind of an approach. Although I would like to make a quote about his experience in India when he was doing these travels, and it has a touching story, and I kind of agree with what you say when I read about it. So he was in India on and he met a musician who played for him and sang on a little string instruments he made himself. He was one of the few really wonderful musicians Stockhausen have met during his lifetime. Then, to quote him, he owned literally nothing, and when I asked him whether he would sell me his instrument for $20,
Oh wow!
he asked this. A sum it would have taken him years to earn. He got, so the Indian driver who was translating for me said, at best something like 10 cents a day from villagers or passers-by. He just looked at me blankly. Tears ran down his cheeks and he shook his head. I was so ashamed. I could have died.
Aha!
There you go.
That's a lesson. That's a real lesson
So
for him.
it sounds like he took his lesson a bit.
Yes,
maybe.
yeah.
And this happened after he composed telemusic when he on his way to on his way back to Germany, passing through many countries, including Turkey, where I come from, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think my understanding is telemusic was a transformative experience for him, and that's why he calls it
It's so important.
the music of all countries in a way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is. Another interesting thing is that regarding culture and the history of the Third Reich, what Stockhausen was brought up. I mean, what year was he born in? 1931 or something?
Yeah.
But so I mean, he was a really little kid when the Third Reich was coming to
1928. Yeah.
1928. So, when the war actually started, he was 11 years old.
Yeah.
So the whole of that formative period of his life was as the Third Reich came to power,
Yeah.
and it's hard for us to imagine what that kind of, if you're a child and you're brought up in a world that puts your culture and your race as superior to everything else, even if you then later learn that that's complete nonsense.
It is really difficult to unlearn things.
Unlearn something that's been drummed into you when you're 2, 3, 4 years old.
Yeah. Also bear in mind he had a very difficult childhood. Early losses and also unhelpful experiences with parents and places. Also living in poverty.
Yes, yeah.
I'm sure all of these factors contributed to
Well, I mean,
the
that's
mindset, right?
That's an interesting thing with German culture in general. I mean, it's something that friends of mine are more deeply involved in, and I've been involved in as well over the last 10 years.
Yeah, let's please note that you have spent such a long time in there.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a professor at the Musikhochschule since 2000, well, since December the 31st, 2004. So it's a while now.
Such a long time ago.
Yeah. And, it's interesting how much effort ordinary German people have put into supporting refugees, particularly from Syria, over the last 10 years. To a huge degree. I mean, literally like 100 times more refugees are taken into Germany than taken into the UK in a much smaller period.
Although I have to note that it's much less than what Turkey...
Absolutely, much less than Turkey, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
But nevertheless, the thing is that everyone in Germany has a story about a family member who's been a refugee.
Yes, they have that perspective.
They have a perspective on what being a refugee is. That there's a massive. You dig into anyone's family history, and there will be a parent, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, whatever, who was homeless and had to carry their stuff around in a cart at some point in the 1940s and 50s, and that's a real education that people just don't have in this country.
Okay. Yeah. Do you also notice that kind of a thing with your students? They are a much newer generation.
A much newer generation, but they're aware of it. They only have to talk to their parents or their grandparents, and they get the information.
They study it when they are in primary school. They learn about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are aware.
They're aware, and there's much more openness and understanding for refugees.
Yeah, I understand.
But just, I mean, going back specifically to telemusic and the cultural imperialism of it, is that it's interesting. It's the first piece that he did that actually used real recordings of other music from elsewhere. I mean, previously it was all so spotlessly abstract.
Yes.
That it was like, no, there will be no reference to anything that's gone before, because anything that's gone before can be coloured by the Third Reich kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this is the first time they'd actually taken bits of music performed by, there's the Hungarian music in there, there's the Japanese music, there's the bits of North Theatre music, there's bits of Amazonian music.
Yes, a combination of all sorts of...
Yeah, and it's literally samples. It's what we would call today samples. It's like you've taken music from elsewhere.
On tapes, yeah.
And intermodulated, put it all together.
Yeah, that's... I think historical piece of music. We always contact Gesang der Jüngling.
Yeah.
But I think, considering this aspect, telemusic is a very much important place.
Yeah.
But also the period of time he had to compose this was very, very limited.
Yes.
And when he was invited to Japan, his daughter was born.
Yeah.
Right, like 4 days, and then he arrives there. His daughter was born back in Germany, and he had such a very limited time to compose this. This was commissioned by NHK Studio, which at the time was also using the WDR studio as a reference to build their own electronic music studio. So the equipment, the system, and the Japanese studio, which was among the pioneering electronic music studios at the time, alongside the Paris studio or Columbia electronic music studio in the States, or BBC Electronics Workshop here, etc. Their main reference and model was WDR, and that's why they valued and respected Stockhausen pretty much. And then they decide to commission this piece, and he shaped such a deep bonding with these people, and the way he respected they respected the music, and that's why he dedicated the piece to the people of Japan.
It's funny, isn't it? It's you can see there's a really lovely lectured. Stockhausen did a lecture tour in the UK in '72, I think, and he did a lecture at Essex University, specifically about telemusic. It's like an hour long, and I think it's available on
YouTube. Yeah,
It's really, it's really nice. It's really funny.
Let's add a link to.
Yeah. And it's what's kind of strange about it is that you get this real. He obviously really fell in love with Japan.
Yeah.
And really fell in love with the idea of a culture where everything could be considered a work of art, and it's an experience that I really resonates with me from when I first went to Japan in '89.
Yeah, it's really important to mention this. Part of the reason we also wanted to discuss this piece. You have experiences in Cologne, but you also experiences in Japan. You were recently visiting Japan again, on top of repeated multiple visits.
Yeah, I mean, I've been over in Japan eight or nine times. Well, quite a few times, yeah. And often, usually for different reasons. Often on business, sometimes on work, sometimes on a holiday, sometimes to visit friends. This time my partner's Japanese, so we're going over there and staying with family.
So you appreciate the perspective in this piece, like why he was mesmerized by the country and the people.
Why he fell in love with it. But again, there is, even in the kind of the love of it, there is a slightly colonial aspect that unsettles me when you hear him talking about Japan. That there was like this sort of, it's almost like the Japanese for him were his most beloved and favourite pets.
That's okay. Yeah, maybe that's how he treated some people.
There's a sort of like, when he's telling the stories of, when he saw sumo or certain kind of describing certain rituals, that he was telling them almost as a joke. I look at these wonderful, funny little people.
He made a comparison with the Cologne studio, and the one different thing was they were serving tea and looking after him the whole time in a way he had never seen elsewhere. So.
Being really pampered. But that's also like a very important part of for Westerners trying to understand Japanese culture when you're in Japan. Is you get treated incredibly well because there is a whole tradition of hospitality. Is an art form. But that's very different to actually living there and being part of the system of having to offer hospitality. Then people feel an enormous pressure on them to be hospitable.
Wow.
And so
you noticed that also. As a visitor.
Yeah, so if you, especially when you have family and friends, you really see the workings of a society where the pressure really goes on people. If you're just an outsider, it's like fantastic. It's just like it's paradise. Everyone's falling over to look after you.
I see. So he had the true Japanese hospitality experience.
Yes, he really had it. Yes, I mean we talk in his lectures. Saying, I decided to visit a Zen Buddhist ceremony. I decided to do this. I told them to record this. That's someone with a team of people working for him.
Yeah. There's also the technical aspect of the piece that is really different. It is composed in forms as he refers to as movements.
Moments.
Moments, and also Fibonacci series.
Yes.
So there is a lot of calculation and mathematical procedures going on in the piece. But another thing I want to talk about is this Japanese instrument.
Oh yes.
Mokugyo. You have one with you?
Yes, I have a mokugyo here.
One more time, maybe?
Here we go.
There you go. Very good.
So the mokugyo is it's a wooden how would you call it? Like a wooden bell, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's used a lot in Zen Buddhist ceremonies. Mm-hmm. And mokugyo literally means wooden fish. Mm-hmm. and it's one of six instruments used in Buddhist rites that Stockhausen used in the piece to define both the length and to start off each of the different moments.
Yeah.
And there's 33 or something, it's 32 or 33. There's quite a few different little sections in the piece.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only 17 minutes, which I think is quite a nice thing for a piece of electronic music like this. I mean, in comparison to the one that came after, because he did Hymnen after Telemusic, which is like 2 hours. I mean, that's asking a lot of the audience, you know.
Yeah, it's quite long. And other instruments which define the moments in telemusic include
there's the lovely little bowls, isn't it? Which is the
sample bells. Keisu. I'm not sure how to
Keisu rin
pronounce it.
mokugyo bokusho taku, which is the really big bowl. Keisu, yeah.
Let's have a quick listen through of one of those moments with Mokugyo. Now let's talk about the premiere of the piece.
Ah, right, okay.
So this was performed on Japanese radio in Tokyo for the first time. And there was also a second commissioning. The reception was pretty good at the time, considering how this piece might be, how alien or strange this piece might be to people. It was very well received at the time, because we also read about experiences which involved protesting or throwing tomatoes. For example, when Varese presented Poème Electronique for the first time in
Brussels.
In Pavilion, yes,
yeah.
Philips Pavilion in Brussels. It was not well received, and it's sad in a way. But unlike
And the famous story about Stravinsky having to escape from the theatre, climb out the toilet window at the theatre when the Rite of Spring was first performed.
But this was very well received in Japan, and another thing is Stockhausen makes comparisons between Europe and Japan in this. So alongside the hospitality and also the reception, another thing he composes is on technical levels, like people in Europe always lay stress on transitions, on musical bridge passages. For a Japanese, the typical temporal sequence is a sudden leap from one time layer to the other, and indeed to extreme opposites. So that's part of the characteristics of this piece of music. And then I became aware that such processes are the most profound things underlying all music, irrespective of whether it is traditional or modern. For me as a European, the Japanese and their music were utterly modern. For me, it was new music and new life. Something he describes as new music and new life is probably something that
really
kept being played and existing for such a long time. Again, we have the Westerner observation, but he incorporates that into the composition.
But it's interesting that a real characteristic of the sound world of telemusic is not just the samples taken from the world music, particularly from Japanese music, but the use of two ring modulators to create this what we call the Gagaku circuit. Gagaku being another whole big historical chunk of Japanese historical music. He's using ring modulators, but the modulating frequencies are always set very, very high.
Yeah.
So a big characteristic of the whole of the sound of the piece is lots and lots of high frequencies,
Yeah.
bunched up together, very, very high.
Yeah.
And it gives it this sort of shimmering brightness.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with the, last time I was just in Japan, just a few weeks ago, at the beginning of January, I went to a performance of No music for No Theatre. And what's interesting with one of the many things that's interesting, but musically, you have three drummers and a flute player. Mm-hmm. And the flute player is playing incredibly high, loud, bright sound,
Yeah.
which is broken up by the drumming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is structurally so similar to what
Yeah.
Stockhausen has done here. This high brightness.
Yeah. 12,000 has sine wave,
Yeah, yeah.
ring modulation.
And that's the thing,
Yeah.
and that's interesting with how the Gagaku circuit works. Is it's basically, I mean, Stockhausen of course claims it was his invention for this piece. It was obviously the technicians of the NHK, of course, coming from someone with a background as an audio engineer. You know, I mean, I know that it's often the technicians that come up with this stuff. But essentially, what you do is
He gets the credit as stars.
There you go. Yeah, but you have one ring modulator, so you have music going into it, and then you modulate it with another frequency, and you
Yeah.
set the frequency quite high, 12 kilohertz,
Yeah.
and you get the sum and difference of the two inputs.
Yes.
And then you put it into another ring modulator. This is the Gagaku circuit, and again with exactly the same modulating frequency. So the sum of the two modulating frequencies and the difference is what you get.
Yeah.
So the sum of 12 kilohertz and 12 kilohertz is 24, which is
Yeah.
well above the range of human
Yes.
hearing.
It is.
But the difference is the original signal, is the original piece of music that got played in.
Yeah.
And that's what he's playing with all the time in telemusic, is folding up the frequencies above our hearing,
Yeah.
so that then we can actually get what was the original signal that was put in there and playing with it. It's really fascinating when you actually set up a Gagaku circuit, which is very difficult to do, well, especially in those days with analog technology, to get exactly the same
Yeah,
frequency.
I can't imagine how it was with the technology they had access to at the time.
They'd have to have an
Right.
oscilloscope to be able to measure exactly that they got the right frequency. These days, you do it with a digital
Yes.
ring modulator. You just type in the number you want.
It will take a minute or two.
Exactly, yeah.
For them, it took days.
Yeah, yeah.
And let's listen to a moment from what you just mentioned. And the use of space in telemusic.
Yeah, well, of course, the use of space is very, very central to all of Stockhausen's pieces, isn't it? I mean, from spatially separating audio through separate channels and separate loudspeakers, as far as the whole thing of the famous helicopter quartet, where you had the players on helicopters.
Yes.
So it was composing where they were in space was actually part of the composition.
Goes beyond the hard pans, the right and left,
Yeah.
and use of all these spaces available. And this was originally intended for playback in 5 channels.
Yeah.
Surround setup for the audience.
But it's interesting that I think the number 5 came from the fact that they'd managed to get a 6-channel
Yeah.
tape recorder
Yes.
at the NHK studio, and they needed
Yeah.
one track for as a control track.
Yeah, yeah.
So that left them with 5. But it's interesting that our contemporary commercial surround sound system is 5.
5
to 1. It's 3 in front and 2 at the back.
Yeah, today it would be.
You'd say 5-1.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at the time they had to use several stereo versions
yeah.
and copies.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So I was thinking for the first performance on the radio, he would have had to have mixed the 5 channels
Yeah.
down into
Yeah.
just 2. But nevertheless, I mean, even if you listen to telemusic, I mean, I remember this very clearly from having in the 80s when I was a student, having one of the first things I bought with my student grant was a little ghetto blaster, a little cassette player. And I remember putting a cassette on of telemusic in stereo on my little ghetto blaster and being absolutely astonished how wide the stereo was.
Yeah.
How things really move and things sound like they're coming from spaces beyond
Yeah.
the physical presence of the
Mixed
speakers.
in such a way that you can hear it from the front or rear.
Absolutely,
Parts,
yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that there is so much high energy, high frequency energy in telemusic. It's the high frequencies that are easiest for us to define direction with. So low frequencies sound like they're coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
And the higher the frequency, the more directional they are. And there's so much high frequency in there that it really uses the space.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a big step for Stockhausen as a composer in that was something that he was really able to really compose space with telemusic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just sound, even on the most rudimentary stereo systems, you really hear stuff coming from beyond the physical width of your speakers.
Yeah, I
with
really
telemusic.
find the specialization work is it inspiring.
Yeah.
And take as a reference in my own music also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Use of space, because most of the time in the past the focus when they went beyond pitch, the focus was texture and timbre, but use of space gave so many options to explore, going beyond mono and stereo,
Yeah.
position sound there and there.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I have to mention that for 8 or 9 years, I worked. One of the bands I worked with, my band for 8-9 years was meta mono, and we did everything in mono,
Yeah.
which is an equal discipline. We've all grown up with stereo.
Yes,
Forcing yourself to work in mono is quite a discipline in itself.
it's sometimes limitations
It
give
really
you focus.
breeds because you
and
have to
creative
focus on other
focus.
areas with
Yeah.
your creativity. And what was astonishing was, we had reviews in The Guardian, we had reviews all over, in the press, all over the place. Nobody mentioned it. It's like nobody noticed.
Let's take this opportunity to mention it then. Why not? Yeah. Yeah. And this is our very first session, and we would like to thank Cafe Otto for giving us the space to record this today.
And reserving a table for us on a busy lunchtime.
Yes. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.